Just realized I was on mute. Hi, everyone. Um, so my name is Pratik Chetri, and I will be your moderator for this session today. And since it's 7:01 p.m. in Nepal and 3:16 in Italy, I think we're going to get started with the program. So initially, let me give a little bit of introduction of the program and who the organizers are. Maybe first, so my name is Pratik again, and I am originally from Nepal, and I'm the director of Authentic Leadership Institute Nepal, and I mostly focus on health, education, and leadership development issues in Nepal, India, and in California. Currently, I'm in Kathmandu um, on day 42 of lockdown. um, and so, a little bit about this program. So, the organizers, the three organizers for this program are King's College Nepal, Nepal 2050 Movement, and South Asian Leadership Forum. King's College was established in 2009, and it is a management school that strives to promote entrepreneurial spirit through progressive education. Nepal 2050 is an informal network of Nepalis and non-Nepalis uh, around the world to nurture a knowledge and action community. So 2050, as in like 30 years from now, what kind of Nepal, what kind of country do we want to create? So it's a very interdisciplinary platform. Um, and South Asian Leadership Forum, SALT, is a community of young South Asian who want to foster regional collaboration for a more united, resilient, and prosperous South Asia. And I'm aware there are a lot of members in this program as well from SALF, SOLF. So welcome everyone. I see people from not only from Nepal and Italy, there are people from Pakistan, from Finland, and so on, right? So today's topic, how to plan and design a climate slash corona proof society, corona proof urban setting, right? Um, so largely, and I will introduce our guest speaker just in a bit, but initially I wanted to introduce about why we decided to put on this program. So in this conversation, it's largely supposed to be a discussion based. So initially, to get started, Dr. Casu will answer some of the pre-prepared questions, but as we go on, we would like to integrate some of the questions you guys might have already. So the questions will be around, what kind of urban planning and design that we can do post-corona world for post-corona world, and in general, for a crisis-proof, crisis-resilient space. We will also talk a little bit about climate change and what kind of work and planning that can be done around that, in especially in urban planning and design frame. Uh, we'll talk a little bit on touch upon SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, and largely today's talk will be focused in Nepali setting, but we will also generally be talking about South Asia and also other low and middle income countries in general. Um, I think with that, I'm gonna go ahead and introduce our speaker, Dr. Alessandra Casu, who is an associate professor of urban design studio and urban sustainability at University of Sassari in Italy. And she's she's the head of international relations since 2010. at the department and is also a board member of the International PhD in Architecture and Environment. She's a member of the academic board of the European Master in Planning and Policies for City, Environment, and Landscape at the Universities of Sassari, Venezia, Lisbon, Girona, and Barcelona. And I mean, I can go on and on. She has like multiple accomplishments throughout her career. So, I mean, there's a reason we invited her to this forum, right? So without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Casu from all of us.
Okay,
Hi,
here I
Professor.
am. Hi.
Hi. I think to get things started, to get the conversation started, I would want to start with how you're dealing with coronavirus, not as a professor, but as an Italian, as a human. Italy has been hit really hard, and the whole world knows about it. So I wanted to talk. I want you to spend maybe like a few minutes talking about how you are dealing with coronavirus right now as a human and as an Italian.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, I must live as a human, as an Italian, in the sense that since the first days of March, all Italy had to start a lockdown. At the beginning, it was not so strong, so hard, because, for instance, we could go to a bar for the first week, for some days. But when the situation got worse, we needed to completely close almost all activities that were not so important for our surviving. For instance, food shops are still open and could never close. But for instance, the university had to close its classrooms immediately. Same for the schools and same for most of the workplaces. Now we have just started on Monday the so-called phase 2, in the sense that 2 months later we are starting the so-called phase 2, in the sense that many activities can restart. But nevertheless, there are three main measures that all of us need to keep always going on. One is always washing our hands. No?
Mhm.
The most important, which is the most related to my work, to my job, and also to the subjects that I teach, we must keep the distance each other. Formerly, it was suggested 1 meter of distance between people. Now, the suggestions that comes from doctors is about 1 meter, 80 centimeters, so almost 2 meters. And the third, always wearing the mask when you meet somebody else. Till now, we have lived in a total isolation, each one in his or her own home. And this was another problem that maybe made the epidemic worse in Italy, because if you were affected by the illness, by the virus, you should stay in your own family. So you could also make your relatives be affected. This was a problem, and for sure it is totally different if compared with other measures I saw in Asia, in which who is ill goes to a hotel, doesn't go home, and doesn't risk to affect the rest of his or her relatives. So this is how we are managing now. And the big question for all of us, many of us, the academicians, are discussing how we will learn to live together, one with each other, and each one with this virus, which is not finishing yet. So in this case, this is a topic I am really interested in investigate, how we can plan and design our cities in order to make them more resilient to different kinds of risks. Of course, first of all, the human surviving.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Um, I think that's a pretty good segue to our first question for the session. You talked about, your research interest is in building resilient cities that are um, that can survive, that is like proof, disease proof of these infections, right? So I wanted to go back to the basics. If you could talk a little bit about what, according to you, is a smart city, and
Mm.
especially in the context of Nepal, a low-income country, and in a post-corona world, what would
Mm.
a smart city mean to you?
Yeah. Uh, I agree a definition of smart city, which was given by the Vienna University of Technology, that was preparing a sort of ranking among 70 European middle-sized cities, not the biggest metropolis, but 7 middle-sized cities that in Europe at least. But if I take away Kathmandu, can work also for Nepal, I think. Because Kathmandu is a big city, the others are more or less like ours. Um, and designing this ranking, Vienna University of Technology identified the 6 main axes, 6 main dimensions, because the current definition that everybody uses is a definition for engineers. Sorry for the joke, Hitesh, but it is a definition more always devoted to ICT in a really little bit better situation. It is a definition that links ICT with mobility, and usually doesn't work with real people and their way of living. And almost never, I don't know what will happen, so maybe we can focus also on it. Almost never this idea of smartness is related to the governance. Mm. I don't want to talk about politics in some countries, especially those of Asia, especially those in which this kind of technologies are developed. I think about 5G, for instance. I wanted to speak in general. And the Vienna University recognized the 6 main dimensions. One is a smart economy. The second is a smart mobility. The third is a smart environment. And this is mostly a physical set of dimensions. After that, the remaining 3 dimensions are more human, less physical, and more related to humanities. Smart people, smart living, and finally, smart governance. These 6 axes that are a way of categorize these ideas are related. The first to the idea of regional competitiveness. So the idea of how you localize your country or your region in a global economy. This is typical for economics scholars. The second is most related at the moment, but maybe we could work in a way to change it. Maybe we can discuss it. The second axis is related to the idea of transport and ICT. Technology is still present, but more related to the management of on transport and mobility. The third is, of course, related to the use, to a smarter use of natural resources. And I have to say that even though I should design the first 3 dimensions, I'm really interested in the remaining 3. Human and social capital. This is something that, especially in a developing country, we can take into account in order to build a better society and a smarter society. Quality of life that doesn't depend on money, actually. It depends on what Amartya Sen calls your capabilities and your functionings. So on the opportunities you have to develop your capabilities and to maintain your functions working. And the last is something that in some countries is not so possible, the participation of the society and the community in the cities and in its government and management, or on its governance, let's say. This is not always related to technology. In this moment, we have to cope with it because we cannot have face-to-face relations, or if we have face-to-face relations, we need to keep some distance. But nevertheless, it is something more related to politics and to policies. Because when we distinguish, for instance, between human and social capital, we are talking about the individual development and the collective development. So we are talking about some kinds of rights. We can see are satisfied, for instance, the right to health, to access a hospital, to access to school, to arrive at the final degree at the university, and so on, as it is stated in the national document of Nepal about its sustainable development goals. Many lines of text are related to education, and this is maybe the most important pillar of this construction. In my school, my first dean I had in this school was always recalling the famous prime minister in India, Indira Gandhi, who decided to invest less in infrastructure and more in alphabetization of people. And now what happens is that many Indian engineers are the best electronic or ICT in general engineers among the in the world. So maybe this is the most important chapter of this kind of book could be written. Yeah. Quality of life is strongly related to it. It's not only the idea of having the opportunity to go to the cinema. It's a joke, of course. For me, it is a part of my own quality of life, but not only this. What is most important is the opportunity to have good relationships with the rest of the world, to have the opportunity to read the newspapers, to have the opportunity to access libraries and go on studying. And in general, my quality of life is made more of relations than of goods. In general, goods are always interesting. Of course, if I have money, I can pay the ticket for the cinema. If I don't have, I cannot. But it is more important what is related to relationships than human relationships than to physical goods. And at the end, the participation is one of the opportunities we should play in the game of governing and making our society smarter. Of course, at the moment, most of the research was focused on ICT, especially devoted to transportation, that in this period of coronavirus become an important focal point. And another sector that should be better developed is a smarter use of natural resources. In the sense that at the moment, some of this technology is becoming used for energy, but what is not so well developed is how to design good environment in which we can live that can also waste less energy or spend less energy or ask for less energy, and having at the same time a good quality. In this research that in this taxonomy that was proposed by the Vienna University of Technology, In the final acts, the one related to governance and participation, maybe we should change the definition. Especially if I think about some of the developing countries I know. In the sense that, but it also happens in developed countries, in the sense that I could maybe prefer to have less participation, even though I love it, if I had less inequalities, so especially social inequalities. Because relating to coronavirus, I read some essays. One was written by the famous Indian writer who also is an architect, Arundhati Roy. And one other was published by Der Spiegel. It is a German newspaper in which the worst risk is if could take place is if coronavirus could touch the slums all over the world, urban slums. Because in that case, the three more important measures, keep the distance, wash your hands, and wear masks, or at least wear devices that can assure your safety, for sure cannot be used, not all of them. And in this case, this is a matter of urban planning and design, but first of all, it is a matter of politics and urban policies. So maybe in this moment, this definition of smartness could be changed in fighting some kinds of inequalities that are also part of the sustainable development goals.
Yeah,
Do you want that I go more in detail?
Yeah, I think that's a very comprehensive definition of a smart city, in terms of the balance between the social, natural, and physical worlds that we live in, right? And thank you for adding on your take on whether the governance part needs to be there, or how it should stay there, especially in relation to inequalities that we see, right? And so my follow-up questions are related to some of the topics you touched upon, but I think because we have some more people join in, let me one more time remind all of you to turn on your video if you can, to put a human face, the humanness to this virtual space. If you could change your names to your name, comma, your location, that would be great. We do have people from Tunisia, Nepal, Italy, New Zealand, London, Pakistan, elsewhere. And the third thing is, if you already have questions, feel free to post it on the chat box, and I will try to integrate them to the questions that I'll ask. Again, we are with Dr. Alessandra Casu from Italy, and we are having this conversation on building a climate COVID-proof urban setting. And we're talking about, SDGs, climate change-related issues, and issues that was brought upon by Corona, especially in low and middle-income countries, right? My other question is related to one of the topic that you touched upon. You talked about in relation to building a smart city. You brought up the concept of spaces, infrastructures that needs to be there, right? I wanted to briefly want to point out to Nepal particularly, right? So Nepal, a lot of families, we live in joint, if not extended families. We have a lot of festivals, rituals, feasts, everything like across the country, all year round, across different ethnicities. Just about 3 weeks ago, we had our National New Year that was in the middle of this lockdown, and a lot of rituals were canceled because of that. Tomorrow there's another big festival that is very important to the Buddhist community in Nepal. So from an urban planning perspective, my question to you is, how can we build structures in cities and towns that can help balance these two, the balance between the need of having physical distance and at the same time celebrating life, celebrating our rituals, celebrating our culture. So how do you, from an urban planning perspective, how do you balance that?
Yeah, you can imagine that in Italy we have famous carnivals. One is in Venice, one is in Viareggio, and we needed to stop them because in crowded places there was a problem of the diffusion of the epidemic. So I can perfectly understand you. And also I live in an island of Italy. It is called Sardinia, which is a little bit luckier than the rest of our country. But also we have some rituals. Sorry? Also, we have some rituals that for us are important. On the 1st of May, the city of Cagliari, which is the capital city of this region, uses to take a saint and bring it for kilometers and kilometers from the capital town to the place in which he was martyred. And after that, 3 days later, he goes back. And we couldn't do it in the same way we used to do. So there is the human dimension which is lost in these cases because we cannot crowd places. So one problem that can be, maybe could also be of help in fighting some ideas of inequality also, is rethink our open spaces, rethink the open space and think to our places of life, either cities or villages or metropolises or whatsoever, in terms of open spaces and not exactly built spaces, built environment with open spaces that could help us to meet each other without being afraid of the others. There is a matter of public spaces, not in the American sense of, not in the American meaning, but in the European meaning. We used to go out of our houses and meet people along the street, in a square, sometimes in a building. And we meet people casually, occasionally, walking in a promenade, you meet people. And till now, nobody was afraid of the others. So we should recover some kind of trust. I would like to trust each other, even if I know that I need to wear my mask, wear my gloves, and keep the distance. Nevertheless, even though nobody can see if I am smiling or not, at least we can talk, at least we can exchange some sight. You know, I can look at the others and do some gesture, for instance, with my hands in order to be understood by who's talking to me. But we need to meet each other. We just need to change something. And so the idea is that we must focus on our open spaces. And second, we must focus on the transportation, but not in the sense of the means of transportation. I would focus on it later. Third, we could focus on the material construction of this open space. Three things mainly. I say so because if I was living in a poor house, but the slum could provide good public spaces, maybe I could go out of home and nevertheless trust to the other people, because I could also be not so afraid of them. Second, one problem is related to transportation, because especially in Italy, there is the habit of using mass transportation, because of course this is less costly and more ecological. But in this moment, we are not so able to keep the distance if we are crowding a tramway or a train or a bus. In this case, we not only have to work with the means or with the physical activities, we have to work, first of all, with policies. What do I want to do? Many years ago, when I was in your place instead of mine, there were researches that were developing the idea of scheduling the city, in the sense that not all services should start at the same time, but they could start at different times so that we can provide a good public transportation service without having everything crowded, without having rush hours, no? And making the city more livable. So this is also related to the way of life and to the quality of life. That has another relationship also to coronavirus that I was maybe can talk about. So there is a matter of policy in organizing our places of life, changing the schedule of working places, changing the schedule of services. Maybe also using the technology, we can avoid moving everybody to the same destination and so on, but I think it is not enough. First of all, it's better to use our smartness. The best smartness is our brain. Use our mind and rethink how we make the things work. And there is another topic which is more physical. Some experiences that are becoming developed in Europe for the post-COVID emergency is either devoted to the open space, for instance, in Barcelona, in Spain, or devoted to changing the way of in which people move. For instance, in Milan, they are investing in cyclable paths. Investing in cyclable paths means that we have to change the localization of physical services. This means that the schools should be more spread better into the territory, that hospitals shouldn't be so big but spread, and so on, or that the public health in general could be different, not only related to the hospital, but also related to neighborhood health services and so on. So there is a matter of localization and planning, a matter of policies, and a matter of design, because in this case we have to convert our paths in better paths for our way of life, and our proofness not only to the coronavirus, but especially to all of those effects which are related to bad mobility and climate effects. There is a research that has been published just today by some Italian researchers in different universities, and one is my colleague Marco Dettori, who Hitesh and Khalda know, and also Bushra knows, which relates the air pollution due to PM10 and PM2.5 with the diffusion of coronavirus in northern Italy. Because the environmental conditions of the northern Italy, the Po plain, it is the plain of the river Po, Padana, are more or less the same environmental conditions that were in Wuhan in China. And because there is a physical reason, the coronavirus is diffused in the aerosol, in the atmosphere, and it can be attached to the PM10, PM2.5, and so it can fly, and it can affect your breath, and after that your lungs and so on. So the idea of having less polluted areas is a good idea also to avoid the coronavirus diffusion. It's an important research published just today that could be useful for these purposes. This idea means that changing the transportation, we change also the emissions. But at the same time, in order to avoid this kind of pollution, for instance, we should build materially, in this case I am talking about the material construction of our places of life, in a greener way. A greener way in order, for instance, to catch the air pollution that can be very, very well done by trees, in order to use bioclimatic design devices. For instance, trees, the natural topography and the built topography can be of help in the deviation of the wind, so changing the way in which either the air pollution or the coronavirus can run. You can change their speed and their direction. And this is also of help. I saw that Nepal suffers of climate change. This is also of help in draining rainwater, so that they can be of use in order to avoid floodings and in order to decrease the hydrogeological risk. At the same time, using especially trees more than the grass, using trees, we can also be of help in decreasing the landslide risk. Some ideas of constructing the material landscape, the territory, and using natural solutions can be of help in fighting either the coronavirus diffusion or the climate effects that can be very, very risky for a country like yours. I have to add another thing. It is not the case of Sardinia, but it is the case of Italy. Almost all Italy is an earthquake territory. There are some parts of Italy that each night have an earthquake. They live together with it. When it is not so strong, they don't worry so much, but in some cases they do. In some cases they do, because depending on the level that the earthquake reaches in the scale of in the Richter scale, it becomes dangerous for human life. The best way to save your own life is to go out your home. When an earthquake is moving, everybody wants to escape from home. So providing open spaces that can collect people also for these purposes can be a very good natural-based solution, not only natural, but almost natural-based solution to cope with different kinds of risk and to save more human lives, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you again for going into so much detail about what a open space, how to balance the need to physically distance at the same time, like invest in infrastructure to promote social gathering and beyond that, right? So right now it's almost 7:40. I do want to open up the space for questions from the audience. I already see there was Zealand who raised hand. Do you want to go ahead and ask your question in brief?
Thank you, Pratik.
I see one from Shale.
Yeah. So maybe like we'll take question from Raj, and then I'll read out Shell's question as well, and then we'll try to answer both of those. And meanwhile, please feel free to post your questions on the chat box. Go ahead, Leslie.
Thank you, Pratik and organizers, for this opportunity. If you're wondering why I'm looking this well dressed, this is New Zealand winter here, and my office room doesn't have AC, so here I am. I'm just 1 o'clock here, 2 a.m. I've just woken up from sleep. And thank you, Professor Casu. It's very, very thought-provoking. And for the organizers, I can see some really smart guys here. a little bit about me. I am an urban planner here in New Zealand from 2005. And I used to work in policy here with the local government. I basically work in that interface of policy formulation and implementation at the coalface of the public. And Professor Casu talked about the political side of planning. It is political. And I have advised the elected representative. So I have a little bit of slight experience in that. And just touching on what you said, one of the things that I always come across and what we are sort of trained is all these aspirational goals are great. They have to be there to give a sense of direction and everything. I think the challenge is how do we distill that to actions so that they produce results? And while hearing to you, this question came into my mind, like at the current, sorry, at the current context, maybe some of our friends in Nepal can answer this. What would be that one, the most important action that we could take or Kathmandu could take in this context of COVID? Just that one action, you know, that could address the most important issue. I'd be really keen to hear that, or also even continue this conversation outside of this. So that's my question. And to give you an example, in New Zealand, you might have heard how proactive this country is to tackle COVID and the results they are producing. And what has already happened here is our main legislation that guides all the planning here, the Resource Management Act. It is already, the change is already signaled. We have a bill in Parliament under urgency. And the changes are being introduced into response, urban planning and development sector. So my question again is something like that. Could be policy, could be something as Professor Casu said, changes in our urban space area. What would be that one thing? I would be really keen to know that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, there are many questions I saw. Actually, I have to tell you that I am envying New Zealand because more or less you are, if not the best country, one of the best in your contamination rate by coronavirus. I cannot say the same about my country. If I was in charge of governing Kathmandu especially, first of all, I would work with a sort of New Deal, I have to say. After that, I will explain better because it is a matter of policies and politics. I would work in fighting inequalities, in making the life conditions better in the slums. I would start from the last people, from who's left for least. Because starting from that, changing in it, I would for sure limit the diffusion of the virus, and at the same time, I would be investing in the quality of life of these people, and maybe I could provide services and functions that are not present in the rest of the city, and that maybe there could find places. So in this case, I would invest first of all in the public space and only later on houses or on housing policies. First of all, in public facilities. It is something due to the emergency conditions in which we are living. What do I want to say? For what I see in Europe and especially in my country, but it is the same thing that I can see in USA. The private sector that will have a restart that will not be complete and that will not be so quick because it is a matter of finance. I want to be a little bit rude saying these words. I know I am cutting my words, but it is a matter of finance. And in a period of stop, finance can be even more difficult. So we will need a great New Deal, a form of New Deal, in which maybe this could be a potentiality and an opportunity for us to rebalance some conditions, in which the investments will be almost public, and almost related to re-put the private sector on march, but we have the opportunity to govern this restart, this re-beginning, let's say, in the sense that we can choose which sector we can invest in. For instance, maybe we will not build so many bridges, but maybe we will build the public spaces. You know, you will make the construction industry work nevertheless, but you will change the purpose, the objective, the aim that you want to reach. I find it is a good potentiality that we should not lose. Maybe we should make our voice be louder and more listened by the different governments, while at the moment, for instance, in my country, who is deciding are medical doctors and academicians in economy. Nobody talks about the physical space of life of these people, but it is the space in which the diffusion of the virus can take place. So maybe I would work in Kathmandu directly starting from the list, but with the first purpose, so that we could try to change the worst scenario and at the same time try to reach some of the best.
Yeah.
If I had the power, but I'm not. So I'm not a governor in Kathmandu. I cannot.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you
so
much
much
very
for the
much, Professor Casu. Very comprehensive answer. Thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it.
And thank you for your pretty convincing answer. Maybe I'm biased, but you know, for someone who works in the space of equity, equality, and justice, like that really hit home really hard. And I wanted to state one of the things that I heard at a conference recently, a conference at Berkeley. They said, you know, when someone says we are going to do this, we as an institution, we as an organization, we as a government, try to ask them what they mean by we. If they include everyone, and especially the most vulnerable ones when they say we, right? And it really reminded me of that. So thank you for your very comprehensive answer. I do want to go to some of the other audience questions, and I want to combine two of the questions from Shail and Shreya, and both are around, they want you to touch upon earlier what you said around we need to rethink our way of modes of transportation, right? And that's what Shreya asks. And Shail is asking you to explain a little bit about what Italy is doing in terms of investment on bicycles to reduce crowd in public transportation and also ensuring low air pollution. So if you could touch upon a little bit of detail on how we can rethink transportation and maybe a specific about how Italy is dealing with it in terms of.
I start from the first question, which is related to the levels of government in Italy, in the sense that we don't have a national policy in this. We don't have a national policy at the moment for bicycles and walkability, while this is a line of action that has been just decided by the mayor of Milan, for instance, because our metropolitan cities have a strong autonomy, and they also have their own funds that they can spend depending on their own decisions. So in the case of Milan, the mayor decided to invest in a different kind of mobility, in helping the cyclability and the walkability in order to make the demand for public transportation decrease. It is not the only answer that can be done to this problem, but for at least it is one. You will see that in general in Europe, most of the cities are responding also using this kind of solutions, changing the way in which we move to go to work, to school, and so on, or to have fun, because we, the Europeans, love to have fun. Also, like you, of course, it depends on what you mean in having fun. When I was touching the idea of changing the schedule time of our workplaces in general, is something that was part of a strong public demand some decades ago. And now it is coming back as an answer we could give to face this kind of problem. What do I mean? At the moment, if I compare this situation with that in which this research was developed, now we can use more the technology, and we could also avoid to move so much to go to work. That this is also something that could help the accountability of municipalities and local governments, because they will need less buildings to host all the workers, for instance. Maybe we can develop better co-working spaces for the public administration and the civil servants. But at the same time, there is a problem of rush hours that is typical in every crowded city. It is not so strange. And very often it doesn't depend on the size of the city. Also, small cities suffer the same problem. Because, for instance, public administration starts to work at 8. Schools start between 8 and 8:30. I talk about my country. Shops open at 9, so the rush hour is always around the 8 o'clock or 8:30. If we could change something, make the work not only smarter, but more flexible, and decide that the public administration can work partially at home in smart working and partially in the place, changing the schedule time in which you are open to the public. For instance, you don't open at 8 or 9, but you open at 11. In this case, changing the schedule time of workplaces in the cities, you could change the demand for mass transportation. So that even though you use the same mass transportation system, you don't find it so crowded as it is usually. Same can be said about factories. It is not an obligation that all factories close at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Maybe some can open later and go on till a later hour. And in this case, you don't have trains so crowded of workers going back home altogether and so on. So in this case, if I compare the situation to the one I knew when this proposal was put for the first time, technology can be of help, because can change something in this demand for public transportation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your answer again. So in the end, let me try to combine two of the questions. So there are two questions, one around, so both of the questions are around the 6 points of smart cities, right? Vishal from Nepal wants you to talk a little bit about what you mean by smart environment. And Kaushal from Finland's question is around the smart people. So his question is, how can the role of higher education in knowledge-based post-COVID society be? And if there is any ongoing discussion in Italy about doing so. So one is on smart environment, another one is on education of smart people.
For what I see in the question was just if the third type was smart environment. The third type is a smart environment, or better, it is the third dimension of smartness. All should work together. And actually, for what I see, there is Kaushal who sent in the same chat the same report I am talking about. So maybe I don't need to focus on it, but a smart environment means something which is related to your last question. I think that a smarter environment is not an environment under ICT. Maybe ICT can be of help in managing my energy consumption, for instance, or the organization of my energy or resources consumption, energy, water, and so on, in monitoring it. But mostly, I want to focus on the following dimension, in the sense that for me, smarter means more aware. So this means that I can spend and invest in technology, but I can invest less money, but with much better results, investing in education and awareness, working with people, investing in social capital, and also human, of course, but especially social capital. And maybe I could translate this idea of participation, not necessarily in participating to the decisions, but at least in participating to the management of a smarter environment, at least. So I think we must invest not only in education, in institutional education, the traditional one, going to school, going to the university and studying more, not only, but for sure in building a better awareness among in our communities, all the world communities, and especially in those in the developing countries, because even though you could feel you are less developed, maybe you are lucky because you could jump over the so-called industrial revolution that the most developed country knew during the 19th and 20th century, and you could go directly to a better system of production of goods, of production of services, and avoiding to waste your resources, to pollute as much as we did, and to increase the inequalities that also this kind of so-called progress provoked in the so-called developed part of the planet.
Yeah, thank you. I want to quickly remind everyone that we have a representation from UK, Tunisia, Pakistan, India, Finland, New Zealand, and Nepal. And Italy, of course. Last question for this session, maybe very briefly. The question is from Gaurav from India, and he's asking about, we're talking about smart investment on infrastructure for climate resilient space, but at the same time, in our economy right now that is hugely ravaged by this virus, like how would you convince these governments to bring out this money for this kind of?
Hi. I'm not a specialist in it, I have to say. All Europe, for instance, decided for a sort of bonds, a sort of stock market initiative in order to find fundings for financing this kind of public intervention, because there is a matter of priorities. At the moment, what's happening is that most governments are paying who is in lockdown, enterprises, workers, and so on, with a una tantum amount, without asking anything in exchange. For sure, I will not be listened if it's not by you, but. In this case, I would transform this kind of aid, which is equal for all, more or less, in a stronger investment in what we call the public capital, which is made of infrastructures. Maybe we can change the infrastructures, of course. We can talk about the public spaces that are infrastructures for our social life. And maybe we can spend less on other kinds of other chapters of our accountability documents. For instance, one of my friends in Barcelona made a sort of joke. During this lockdown, we discovered that we can survive without football, soccer players, but we cannot survive without peasants, without farmers. So for sure, I don't know if we will be able to. Maybe you who are younger and stronger, and depending on how you are able to be listened by your governments, you would be maybe more able than me. We can claim for a different hierarchy of the priorities.
Mm-hmm.
Let's invest less in some kinds of economic sectors, and let's invest more, at least at the moment, in the public capital until the private enterprise will not be able to restart. But maybe also the private enterprise will restart in different sectors, with different products, with different services, with different ways in general. So there is a matter of a strong New Deal that we need. And for sure, there is a matter of social responsibility by some, let's say, privileged people. What do I want to say? I didn't lose my salary, my wages, while there are workers who did. So maybe it would be a good solidarity act if I agreed that my government asked me, buy these bonds, do this investment in our social and public capital. I don't want to ask you to give me money, but invest. It's you who can invest. You will not have a so high rate of renting, but at least you will invest in your own place of life. Well, I didn't hear a government saying anything similar to it at the moment. I would like to. I'm not an investor at all. I don't love stock market. I don't mean money that can be won by stock market. But in a moment like this, I could invest in this kind of stock market in order to reinvest in my own place of life.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. I wanted to bring up while this question of investment has come up, I wanted to bring up that United Nations has come up with a $2 billion fund as a global humanitarian response plan to fund the the Corona crisis, especially in poorest countries. And I know a lot of it will be spent on health infrastructure, health systems, but also a lot will be spent on, what kind of world that we want to build post-Corona, right? So I think individually, it is also our responsibility to talk to these people and make them accountable how they're actually spending these huge amounts of funding. And similarly, there are other huge chunks of money, by the IMF, by country level, different, by multilateral coalitions of countries. So I highly encourage you to look into what those pockets of money are and how they are being spent. I think it's 8:04 and, we're over time. So at this point, we would like to wrap up. But before we wrap up, I quickly want to remind that this discussion was made possible by the three organizers: King's College, South Asian Leadership Forum, and Nepal 2050 network. And there was a question about whether and how we all of us can be connected even after this discussion session, we encourage you to send an email to South Asian Leadership Forum @gmail.com. South Asian Leadership Forum, no spaces, no dot, no underscores, South Asian Leadership Forum @gmail.com. And this is part of a series of discussions and talks that will not only be around urban planning settings, not only be around Nepal and low and middle income countries. The idea is to talk about other policies, other issues that are relevant globally. So this is again, do that. And lastly, I want to thank Dr. Alessandra Casu for being patient and answering all of these pertinent questions. I also want to briefly thank Hitesh, Busan, and Udgam, because of which this was made possible. I was just the face. I was just asked to moderate it, but actually those three guys actually made the whole thing happen. And also all of you for attending this session for an hour, more than an hour, from around the world. So thank you all, especially thank you, Dr. Alessandra Casu.
Oh, it's me who wants to thank you, because you gave me the opportunity to tell something that I haven't told before. So thank you very much for your enthusiasm, for inviting me and asking me so important questions. In some cases, I needed to organize an answer, thinking something that I hadn't thought before. So it's me who has to thank all of you. You, the three people, for the invitation, but all the people who demonstrated some interest in this short speech and a little bit interactive. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and I hope it is only the first one.
Yeah, likewise.
And I wish you all the best, of course.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night, good day, good afternoon, wherever you are. Stay safe.
Thank you.